There's things that you learn along the way. There's things that you learn not to do anymore and things that you learn work better. And I've got Brad Kearns here, who has a heck of a track record when it comes down to triathlons, when it comes down to endurance sports. I want to talk about the things that you never want to do when it comes down to recovering, and what we've both learned, more so what you've learned at the ripe young age of 58, doing this for a long time. So Brad, give a little background on who you are so people have some context to extra joints.
Today's video is brought to us by House of Macadamia. I popped a link down below. I highly recommend that you add macadamia nuts into your diet. I don't care what kind of diet you're doing, okay? If you're vegan, if you're paleo, if you're keto, if you're not keto, if you eat a bunch of carbs, whatever, adding macadamia nuts is a great way to potentially improve insulin sensitivity, but also just provide yourself with something that's very satiating and makes you feel full throughout the day while being very nutritious and super low carb. So House of Macadamia harvests all their own macadamia nuts in South Africa. They're the largest processor and harvester of macadamia nuts, and they process and package less than an hour away from where they harvest. So stuff is literally as fresh as it can get, like it's right off the tree pretty much. So I popped a link down below that'll save you 20% off whatever you get from them, whether it's their chocolate covered macadamia nuts that are sugar-free, their macadamia nut bars, their macadamia nut oil, their straight up macadamia nuts, whatever you want. 20% off using that code right down below this video.
Thanks. Yeah, I go back to my career as a professional triathlete, which kind of informed my career and my work since then. So from age 20 to 30, I raced on the pro circuit. I had some great highlights and learned the lessons of success and failure in such an intense and dramatic manner as a triathlete that it kind of informs everything I do in my life. But that journey was wonderful, but it was a nice segment of my life where I was training all day. I was asleep half of my career, so I slept 10 hours every night and took a 2-hour nap every afternoon and was dedicating everything to peak performance and pushing my body so hard and traveling around the world. And so when that ended, then it was like, okay, now I got to live the rest of my life. I like being fit, I like being healthy, but reflecting on what I did, it was completely misaligned with health because of dedicating so much energy and time to fitness that it kind of precluded living a normal, healthy lifestyle. And in fact, my health was, destroyed in many ways during that time period, trying to gain incremental improvements in my finish time. So that part, I had to recalibrate and look at the rest of my life with new goals like longevity, disease prevention, not getting injured, not getting exhausted, raising a family, building a different career in a chair, looking at a screen. And that's been kind of fun because you can take the experience of pushing your body to the maximum and all those wonderful things about it, and then also learning from the mistakes.
Now you look at like today's triathletes, you have a handful of them or a lot of them that are still probably in that same category of just pushing it all the way. I mean, there's literally jokes about, triathletes being widowmakers, right? I mean, it's like you spend your entire life training, your family just goes to, and I think for a lot of the people watching, they're not professional triathletes, but they might be people that are struggling to find that balance between performance and recovery, and really just finding that. If you had to say, okay, what's one thing, if you were still on the professional triathlete circuit, or if you went backwards 30 years, what would you do differently that may not have negatively impacted your training, but would have positively impacted the rest of your life? Like knowing what you know now.
I think, we need to tone this energy down, this obsession with peak performance, especially for the recreational person. I mean, I was able to sleep half my life. I didn't have to go off and run into a career and hectic life stresses on top of the stress that I was putting on my body. And so generally, the enthusiastic peak performer today, whether it's CrossFit, or whether it's endurance stuff, ultra endurance stuff, any people who are, really keyed up about being the best they can be and type A and driven and motivated, tone things down. Because the body responds better when you balance health and fitness rather than just this obsessive pursuit of fitness. And we can realize these mistakes when you get injured or catch an upper respiratory infection and you're down for 2 weeks. You've just lost a lot of potential progress because you overdid it. And especially at my age now, I'm 58 years old, so everything's having to be recalibrated because I can't recover in the same manner that I did when I was a young person. And so now, this fascination with like crushing a workout and waking up the next day and feeling so sore and thinking that's a good thing because your trainer pushed you so hard. I think it's a mistake to induce muscle soreness. I know it's going to happen because you're competitive, you want to do something, it's beyond what you did before, or whatever reason, you're going to have to deal with that. I get sore all the time, but each time I go back and think, okay, well, what if I had done 4 reps of those sprints instead of 6? I just thought 6 was good because I'm tough and I can do it. And you feel good at the time and you're pumped up and you're excited, but you pay the price over time when you let your competitive intensity get unregulated. So to answer your question, back when I was an athlete, I was so driven and focused on peak performance and I wanted to be the best guy in the world. And it harmed me in many ways because I was so keyed up and so driven to results. And so reflecting back, you have to take what your body gives you every day and nothing more. And don't force the process of improvement to happen in an inauthentic manner. And so what that means is maybe your genetic and your lifestyle potential, your situation is putting you as a middle of the pack guy. And that's okay. And you're going to go do your marathon or your ultra or your measured performance of any kind, and you're a middle of the pack person. But what happens is we finish in the middle of the pack, and a lot of us who have that mindset are going to push it harder and get better and go faster, and then we go into a life of injury breakdown, burnout, illness, psychological imbalance, like you referenced the person who's the widowmaker in more than one way. So that part, I think, if I just toned down my competitive intensity and regulated it very carefully, and you see the great champions of the world are very, very good at this. So if you're passing up a great runner on the trail because they're having a recovery day, they're not going to join up with you and try to keep up. They're very focused on their heart rate or their parameters, and they're focused on the big picture and long-term performance goals.
That's a very good way to put it. And you think that, I mean, this is applicable to someone that's obviously not a professional athlete as well. It's something
even more applicable,
yeah,
because they have so many other stress factors, you know.
How would you say, like, you know, for someone that is just a regular person that's just wanting to work out hard, but wanting to still feel that, I don't know, that visceral response you get when you do have a hard workout?
Yeah.
I mean, what are some metrics, not even necessarily metrics, but what are some even subjective metrics that people can pay attention to say, hey, like, I'm pushing it too hard? Because the thing with like delayed onset muscle soreness is sometimes that happens, you know, if you're run down and you stress your muscles just right, you know, one day and you're totally recovered and stress your muscles the same way. Like one day you'll get sore, one day you won't get sore. So you can't always predict soreness because that's a weird thing. I know I personally feel like stiffness is sometimes a better predictor. It's like because that's like implying a little bit more inflammation, whereas delayed onset muscle soreness, we still have a lot of questions about what caused it.
Yeah.
But you know, how does someone know they're reaching that point? Because like for me, I get a prefrontal cortex override that just says, no, like you've got this, like just push through it and find all these justifications and reasons. Yeah. Like how does one start to listen to their body, so to speak?
Good question. I mean, we're socialized to kick butt. And when we get put into a competitive situation with the loud music that you played for us during our workout, or going to the group class, or places where you're, you know, interacting with your peers, an organized event where there's an announcer and a race number, we just get put right into fight or flight. And so I think the first thing is to back up and ask yourself, what is your purpose for pursuing this passion, this outlet that you have? And so when I was a professional athlete, I had to really own this answer, because I was trying to make a living at it. I was trying to honor my sponsors and compete and dedicate everything to being the best result. That doesn't have to be the way for everybody. So if your purpose is, I gotta get out of the house, man, I'm so frustrated, there's so much stress in my life and in the office, and I wanna go blast a workout on the trail or in the gym, that's fine, and you can't judge that. But I'm talking to generally people that I coach or the audience that I speak to. People are interested in peak performance and reaching their potential. So it's like, wait, if you just said that, now I got you, man. Then you can't go blast the workout on the trail on Thursday because you had a rough day in the office, because that's going to be in the stupid category. And then we got to write a big S on your forehead because, wait, aren't you training for that event 3 weeks from now? Why did you do that today? What purpose does that have towards your progression and your tapering and your sensibility of stress-rest balance? And so even in my case, like, here's an enticement to do a race where I can earn some money and get a victory and get my picture in the magazine. But wait, that doesn't align with my highest goal, which was I want to peak for the bigger event later down the season. So even an elite athlete has to weigh the importance of the relative importance of each workout and each competitive opportunity. And the recreational person, if they say to me or whoever themselves, I want to do my best. A lot of them say, I want to be a role model for my children, ages 8 and 12, and show them that their dad can be healthy and athletic. Well, then don't go and exercise when you have 101 fever, because that's stupid. And a lot of people, have to look in the mirror and face this and say, yeah, part of me is that guy that wants to burn energy on the trail to get a little bit of an ego boost or a little bit of a vent for all the stress that I face in the workplace. And those two goals really, butt heads. And I'm going to put an argument, a presentation out that it's way more fun and way more rewarding to do this right. When we're talking about a devoted fitness goal, doing it right is just a much better experience in every way, including the reward of, training hard for a goal event and doing it right. And so, if you wake up on the day that you've been training all summer to go climb the highest mountain in Southern California, but you got a little bit of a scratchy throat, I am here to tell you from experience that you got to shut the engines down and go home and sleep it off for a couple days, because what you're doing is you're digging a hole in the name of the end result. And that's not the most fulfilling way to go through life. Same with a career or anything where you're obsessed with the result because you think that's going to bring happiness. And I think the happiness comes with the appreciation of the process and doing something in a manner that supports health, supports your well-being, and doesn't override because you can't control your competitive and your ego.
How do you think this translates into nutrition as well? Because if you looked at, say, your nutrition as a professional athlete, we'll kind of digress for just a second and get pragmatic. First of all, what did your nutrition look like back then? Were you giving much mind to it at all? Knowing what you know now, what would it have looked like? And then thirdly, we can branch off from there and say, okay, how does this all triangulate back to what we eat and how we fuel, and does this matter?
One thing that comes to mind is the popularity of this restrictive dietary strategies today: fasting, keto, carb restriction, calorie restriction, time restricted feeding, all these things that are presented as having health boosting benefits. And of course they do validate that, but there's a certain segment of people who have dove into this and kind of form this restrictive mindset in the name of health, but they're putting too much stress into their lifestyle mix again. And so we see people blowing out their endocrine systems or their hormonal reproductive systems. The female CrossFit athlete with the six-pack who goes home and has a ketogenic meal after slamming a very high-performing, high glycolytic workout is starting to stack up too many things that are stressful, rather than just being sensible and saying, nutrition is to fuel my body, and one of the great pleasures of life is eating, so I'm going to enjoy selecting the most nutritious foods and eat to my heart's content and enjoy every single bite, rather than getting this noise in about what am I going to do with pricking my finger and looking at my readings and feeling diminished if I'm not hitting these arbitrary goals. So I think we can get out of hand, just like out of hand with training too hard and getting too competitive in training. We can get out of hand with scrutinizing our diet to the point where we suffer from orthorexia, which is unnatural fixation on eating so correctly that it brings a stress element into your life because the restaurant menu doesn't meet your standards.
Yes, no, absolutely agree. So, what did your diet look like when you were training?
Well,
back then?
I was very interested in healthy eating at a young age, and so the best-selling books of the day, like Eat to Win in the 80s, was a book about cleaning up and getting away from the crappy processed foods. But it was the high complex carbohydrate paradigm, and so I wasn't eating packaged crap back then, but I was making big bowls of pasta and a grain-based diet, huge bowl of cereal every morning, but it was all the clean, healthy, natural cereals that I'd go to the bins at the natural food store. And so generally speaking, the diet fueled me pretty well. I'm sure my blood work was fine on all those levels, so and I was burning a ton of calories every day. Of course, I wish for all the knowledge that we have today, and I would strive for more nutrient density. So I would be eating a lot of red meat. I'd be eating a lot of the superfoods like salmon eggs and oysters and oily cold water fish and pasture-raised eggs. I don't know if they had those. They probably had them at the farmer stand, but not in the store. But just bumping up some of that consumption of superfoods, dialing in the protein, which may or may not have been optimal back then, but I wouldn't say it was a big strike against me, and we were doing the best we could at the time. And interestingly, even in that high carbohydrate paradigm, we talk about getting fat adapted and metabolically flexible today. I was tremendously metabolically flexible, and I proved it one time. I rode my bicycle 100 miles without food, without any calories, and I was a guy who was slamming carbohydrates all day long, but I was in such good fitness level that I didn't need them for the ride. And I proved it was possible, but it certainly wasn't optimal. And we still talk about that today a lot. Like, all these things are possible, to go do your CrossFit workout and then come home and fast for 3 more hours and then have a ketogenic meal and then wake up and do it again. It's possible, but I'm going to argue that it's not necessarily optimal to add the stress of fasting and keto to a stressful workout. So I've kind of rethought my dietary strategy these days to just fuel myself with as much nutritious food as possible. Dr. Tommy Wood, one of the great leaders that we respect in ancestral health, he told me this many years ago. It took a while to kick in, but he said, for healthy athletic people like you, Brad, I want you eating as much nutritious food as possible every day until you gain a pound of body fat, and then you turn it down. And that's when you realize you're optimal, that you're eating so much that you're actually adding body fat from nutritious intake of eggs and steak and liver and smoothies and tons of fruit and all the things that are now the centerpiece of my diet.
Yeah, no, he said the exact same thing to me. No, Tommy is, and he's also brought up some very interesting things that I want to come back, and sort of touch on. And when you mentioned talking about ketogenic or fasting or semi-restrictive protocols, it's important to stress that you might progressively overload your workouts, but you should not progressively overload, or I guess underload, your nutrition.
It's overloading your stress.
Yeah, it's not the same axis, right?
Yeah.
So the way that I look at some of these diets, and especially for me who, I fast a couple days per week, right? Mm-hmm. I treat that like a weight vest on my nutrition. I'm not going to run with a weight vest every day, right? Mm. But if you look at progressive overload with training, if you're not adding a little bit more weight, if you're not adding a little bit more volume, then at some scale, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, whatever, at some scale, there's the micro scale in between, right? Mm-hmm. You may not progress every day. Yeah. You might progress a little bit, come down, progress a little bit, come down, proper periodization. That doesn't necessarily align the same way nutrition is, right? You don't say like, okay, well, I'm going to just progressively underload my nutrition until I'm so adapted that I can live on 500 calories. Yeah. That defeats the purpose. Yeah. In some ways, the entire idea behind caloric restriction, the entire idea behind a lot of these things is to fundamentally slow your metabolic rate down to be able to adapt to less fuel. So you end up in this vicious cycle where you are adapting to less fuel, adapting to less fuel, mm-hmm. adapting to less fuel, while simultaneously adapting to more stress, adapting to more mm-hmm. stress. Mm-hmm. There's going to be a little sweet spot there where you're like, okay, this is working. But that's when you have to have the strength to say that's enough. Because when you get those little dabbles of a ketogenic diet, little dabbles of fasting, occasional workouts with the weight vest, so to speak, on your nutrition, mm-hmm. that's exactly what you need to say, hey, yeah, here's a little periodic stressor. You're not going to go sit in an ice bath for 7 or 9 minutes, right, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Like anyone's going to say, oh, that's too much stress on the body.
Right.
So why would you fast 36 hours and run a marathon every week?
Yeah, like you could do it. It's possible for a super highly adapted, fit individual. Is it optimal? And that's going to be my comeback to anyone who wants to challenge. And it's an escape hatch. But I've really been thinking about that so much lately. And I've told you this. My new mantra now is perform, recover, perform, recover. And at my age, I have sat back and rethought some of these things, because what's the best use of my stress mechanisms, my stress capacity? I'm going to argue that it's fitness goals and preserving and maintaining lean muscle strength throughout life, as we see in Peter Attia's best-selling book. He thinks that's the number one intervention for longevity. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with that. And so if that's my number one goal, and I just tried to hang with Thomas DeLauer today and finish that workout, I want to come here with every resource I possibly can. And in my case, lately, it means maximum cellular energy status, as Jay Feldman says, Jay Feldman Wellness, where I'm just stuffing my face essentially without regard to picking fasting periods or looking at my carbs and trying to keep them in some sweet spot, and just kind of erring on the side of, as Tommy Wood said, let's see, maybe I'll gain a pound of fat someday because I'm toning down my workouts and still eating as much as I can. Now, that might not land for everybody, which is fine, but I think there's a big segment that deserves to reflect on this whole idea of how do I balance my stress and rest scales. And you talked about the ice bath. Jay Feldman on my podcast mentioned, no one says arguing with your girlfriend is a hormetic stressor, but it is.
Exactly.
It's the same as the ice bath. It's the same as the sprint workout, and it's the same as jumping into keto. Maybe when you're not well adapted, where it is really stressful and you get the keto flu. And I'm calling BS on keto flu. Like, if you have the keto flu, go eat some fruit. And if someone's looking at my bowl of fruit in the morning and anyone wants to argue that that's not supportive of my health, peak performance, and longevity, we're going to sit down and have a talk about being reasonable and sensible, instead of jumping into these bandwagon camps and saying, oh, watch your fructose because you might get uric acid buildup in the liver. No, I'm looking at my blood work and it looks fantastic. And so my main parameters now are like, what's my 400-meter sprint time? What's my high jump bar? And that's all I care about, in a sense, more so than checking certain boxes because some study shows that it's going to support longevity if I do this or that with diet restriction. Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do as well with where someone stands as far as metabolic health too. Someone that is very sedentary, that's insulin resistant, they might get a benefit out of, I'll preface this was, they would get the most benefit out of being physically active. But that's not always possible for people when they're in very poor metabolic health. Yeah. So the discussion that we're having, when you are physically fit, and this is the challenge that I've had, is when I was overweight, restricting carbs, fasting, that got me to where I needed to be. Winners. Yeah. And then once as I've gotten healthier and healthier, my performance has gotten better and better and better. Yeah. Where I've had to realize that, maybe it doesn't make sense for me to fast so much. Maybe it doesn't make sense for me to restrict carbohydrates so much. And I still dabble in it because it's fun and I like to experiment. But being able to it's difficult sometimes to thread that needle of saying well, here's someone that's performance minded, that's their goal is performance, and treating keto fasting as a hormetic stressor is a different category from someone that says, hey, I'm metabolically deranged, my HOMA-IR, my lipo-IR are out of whack. I don't metabolize carbohydrates well because I'm metabolically dysfunctional. That's a completely different ballgame, whereas I would never say that fruit isn't healthy or wholesome. I eat a crap ton of fruit. But there are going to be a subset of people where if they're not active, they probably should modulate their carbohydrate intake. Personally, we both know carbs are not essential. They are optimal, right? So it's a privilege to have carbohydrates. And that privilege comes from, in my opinion, movement. Right? And if you look at if you're moving, then the carbohydrates fuel the movement. But if you're not moving, you certainly don't need them. Can you still lose weight with them? Of course, absolutely. But the carbs become not necessary because obviously you're producing carbohydrates via other mechanisms. In rekindling that mitochondrial metabolic health, sometimes what that group of people needs in order to gain the fat loss and the strength and the metabolic efficiency to get active again. Because I think that everything we're talking about, activity trumps all. And I think we all tend to agree on that. It's just difficult for some people to get there first.
Yeah. I also should put in a plug here for just ditching processed foods.
Yeah.
Before we watch any further content or start splitting hairs, it seems to me in real life circumstances, and even close friends, family members, people that I work with, there's some stuff still leaking into the mix. And so if there's 8% of your diet's still shitty, let's just focus on that before we start to worry about the other details, especially someone who's metabolically unhealthy. It's like focus on nothing else than cleaning out your shelves and making better choices. And that's going to be by far the biggest payoff, I think. Yeah.
If we come back to even recovery, I had an interesting conversation not long ago that, one of the biggest attributes of recovery is angiogenesis or increased blood flow or even increased vascularization, like to a certain degree, and being able to actually recover, right? And one of the best things for recovery is movement. And you run into a situation where if you completely blast yourself in a workout and you make it so that even if it's unbeknownst to you, you are less active throughout the course of the day, from a fat loss perspective and a recovery perspective, it's suboptimal, right? Like, because if I crushed myself and then I don't even realize that I'm 30% less active that day because subconsciously I'm so drained, and just deep down internally I'm drained and not moving as much. I'm definitely not burning as many calories, and my non-exercise activity thermogenesis of just acting and moving around throughout the day is going to burn way more than my workout. Like, unless I'm a professional athlete that's training extensively, like most people are going to burn more through their, parking at the edge of the parking lot, walking to the grocery store, walking through Target, doing this, moving around, fidgeting, all this kind of stuff. They're going to burn much more doing that than they ever did in their workout. The workout is just a stimulus. So when you treat your workout as your primary driver for that, and you're sedentary the rest of the day, intentionally or unintentionally, you hinder your recovery. So I think the microdosing workout strategy, where you're doing these shorter things here and there, or you're dabbling just enough to get a stress response for the regular person, right? Just you can get progressive overload, but progressive overload is relative. Like if you take a power lifter that's training for 3 hours a day and he needs to progressively overload on certain lifts, like he's going to progressively overload on 3-hour segments. Like if you are accustomed to 20-minute blasts,
progressive overload, walk 2 cubicles instead of 1.
Precisely though. It's still progressive overload. And it's still very simple fundamentals. But it allows you to be able to move throughout the day and get a more optimal result.
Without the massive risk of, compressing your activity goals into some badass workout, which has a high risk of breakdown, burnout, illness, and injury, and prompts that laziness throughout the day. Katie Bowman, nutritious movement expert, she talks about this lazy athlete mentality where we give ourselves hall passes left and right because we had such a kick-ass workout from 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. And now we have a body of research under the term active couch potato syndrome, where fit people who devotedly go to the gym and slam workouts on a regular basis show the same adverse blood markers as people who are sedentary, because they're sedentary for the 1-hour subway ride, the 8 hours at the desk, and the leisure time on the couch in the evening. And talk about things I wish I'd done differently or knew back when I was a triathlete. We thought the gold standard for recovery was the couch and the rental videos. Now I'm dating myself. I'm definitely 58 because we'd go to the store and rent VHS tapes, and I would do my 7-hour bike ride, and then I'd be immovable for hours and hours after that because I was so, thinking that this was the best way to recover. And now it's like walking around the neighborhood and doing easy pedaling and things like that are superior to sitting on a couch, which is a nice, mind-blowing revelation. And just getting up and moving around, you're going to improve your lymphatic function, blood flow, inflammation control, all those things, and bounce back the next day. So like after I do a sprint workout, which today is my most intense session, which is really difficult because I have performance goals, and so I'm doing stuff that's right there on the edge, I will make a devoted effort to walk around more and do more general low-level activity in the 12, 24, 36 hours after that, because it's going to speed my recovery.
It's interesting. I mean, I've definitely noticed personally that if I crush myself, between 6 and 7 a.m., and then I'm relatively inactive the rest of the day, my, subjective markers of recovery scores, which for the record, although I wear devices, I don't bank on those. I bank on my RPE, how I feel. That's the most important thing. But my recovery scores would almost invariably be poor the next day if it's a hard work, or poorer, right?
Yeah.
However, if I do 2-a-days, which I know is more time intensive technically, but even if it was shorter workouts, if I came in and I trained from 6 to 6:30, did some weights, and then from 4 to 4:30 p.m. I hit the Peloton bike, my recovery is usually better, and it makes a lot of sense because I fall victim to that, where it's a very obsessive mentality and a very all or nothing mentality. And most athletes and performance-minded people fall into that, right? They get themselves focused in one bucket, or whether it's their career, whether it's whatever, 100% here, and then a lot of things take a back seat. And it's easy for us to reward ourselves by being lazy because we had a good workout. But again, when it comes down to mere thermodynamics, mere calories, not to mention recovery, blood flow, non-exercise activity, thermogenesis, all these brain benefits of staying active throughout the rest of the day, it's almost better to say, hey, I'm going to push it to 70 or 80%. I'm going to cut it a little shorter than I would have normally, and I'm going to be active the rest of the day. It's so hard to wrap our mind around that.
It's tough,
because that's not, you're not getting the reward. You're not getting, and I know so many professional athletes and endurance athletes that just bank on a hard workout so that they can go sit down and do nothing and then indulge in a bunch of, quite frankly, crap food, right? It's like this weird binge and purge mentality that comes with being a professional athlete. And toning that back is really, really difficult.
I still make mistakes every time because I enjoy the activity so much. And I do masters high jumping. And so I do the approach and I practice my form in the high jump. But I know from research, the elite jumpers are good for about a dozen full approach jumps. So the Olympic high jumpers will have a great session that entails no more than 12 full takes, and that's a lot. And I'll do 13, 14, 15 because I didn't get it right that last time. Just one more time. I knew if I just curve a little stronger, drive a little more. And so I'm exceeding the capacity of the elite Olympic high jumper as the old man in the empty high school stadium, knowing it's stupid, but I have so much enjoyment from the process that I make the mistake and then pay the price later. And so telling everyone, it's still worth listening to it myself and telling everyone, if you just tone things down, things will come out better for you, but you have to trust the process. And again, back to the elites and the people that I was able to hang around with and see what the very best did. Mark Allen, the Grip, the greatest triathlete of all time, I remember one time he overslept for the most important workout of the week down in San Diego, that 60 guys would do a trail run 12 miles. And it was like you measured how your training was going by how you performed in the Tuesday run. And I saw him, 4 minutes behind last place. I said, "What happened today, Grip?" He goes, "Oh, I overslept." It's like, here's the number one triathlete in the world on the most important workout of the week where everyone will drive. I drive from Los Angeles to do the workout. But he needed his sleep more than, he was willing to be flaky rather than just, show up with fight or flight hormones again like everyone else, because his mind was way far in the distant months of going onto the lava fields of Kona. And so the sacrifice that we think most elite athletes make, it's not the sacrifice you think, but they wake up every morning at 6 a.m. It's such a sacrifice. The sacrifice is to keep everything under control, even their stress mechanisms in other areas of life. So they're not arguing with their girlfriend as much as the other people because they're just knowing how to reach that, the highest level of peak performance, which is to stay cool, keep your emotions under control, keep your energy regulation under control. Don't mess around with, deprivation of whatever it is, not eating enough food that we see, certain recreational athletes and fitness enthusiasts getting into.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that, the example with Mark Allen, being able to have that eyes on the prize sort of mentality, coupled with what you and I were talking about earlier surrounding anti-fragile, right? So what I mean by that is he was so fixated on this that he controlled so many elements of his life to keep stress-free. Do you think it would have been possible for him, knowing how Mark was, to be able to say, I'm going to relax and not worry about my sleep so that in turn I sleep? And this comes from our discussion.
Great.
We had a discussion offline about this, about like being like this fixation on perfect sleep, which you and I both kind of share, like the regimen to try to sleep good, try to get, prioritize our recovery, prioritize our sleep, but in an effort to do so, sometimes you sabotage it. Like it becomes so much. Whereas like then you see people that can sleep, they can find a comfortable patch of grass and then they're like, that's a perfect place to sleep and conk their out for 8 hours because they're not tripping out. And talking about your perception of something, like Bruce Lipton talks about, your perception of blue light and how it impacts your sleep is probably more impactful than the blue light itself. My wife can stare at her phone like right before bed and then be like, and out and sleep for 8 hours. Whereas I'm like, I looked at the phone for 5 minutes. No, now I'm sleeping for 4 hours. So
that's
when
huge, man.
You look at something like someone like Mark that was clearly controlling so many aspects of his life. Do you think he was inflicting stress upon himself, and where do we factor in? How is someone hardwired? Is Mark hardwired to say, all right, my eyes are on the prize. I don't give a shit about anything else. It just doesn't bother him.
Well, whatever the wiring, you better understand neuroplasticity if you want to be a good athlete, and you better be willing to shed some of these personality attributes that no longer serve you. And so that was when I said that my opening line, like I learned the lessons of success and failure in such an intense and dramatic manner as an athlete that it's informed everything I've done as a parent, in my career. Every day I reference those examples because when you try to fool yourself and talk yourself into whatever aphorisms you state, and you go to the race and you get 8th, and you're flying home on the airplane going, why didn't I get first? I told myself I wanted to win and I was willing to do whatever it takes. And it's like, you wussed out in this manner and that manner, you overdid it on these examples, and you weren't really 100% committed to winning the race. You were more committed to massaging your ego 17 times in the last few months, and that part is I think the best growth you can get from fitness goals of any kind. Even going and finishing the Peloton workout on your bike in your living room when you don't feel like it, it's a great way to break through from some of these things that hold us back in life. And so I was thinking mostly of this common characterization of the serious athlete who has a shitty workout and then they're moody when they come home and they snap at their spouse and they just are in a bad mood because they didn't hit the numbers that they thought. And that's like, that's a game that a lower level performer is playing with themselves to teach themselves how serious they are because they're in a bad mood, because their workout was bad. Or as they say on the golf course, what is the demonstrative temper on the golf course? What does that really represent when you slam your club down after you hit a bad shot? Is that you're trying to convince the people that are watching that you think you're better than you really are. And it's like, wait, do we have to push rewind? You know what I mean? It's a big one to go, oh shit, you're right. So if you're playing by yourself, you hit a bad shot, maybe you're not going to go, damn, you're just going to take the information and try to hit a better shot next time. So me, as a really intense driven competitor my whole life in many areas, I finally learned, dude, get over yourself. That was the original name of my podcast, because it was the greatest lesson I learned is, get over yourself, just be in the mix, appreciate the process of personal growth and all the, peripheral benefits that you get. And it's not really about the winning and the losing and having a bad workout and being moody, or, winning a race and feeling like now you're superior to your fellow man, which I think is another trap that people can fall in when they get too aligned. They attach their self-esteem to the results of what they're doing. And that's a good way to get your ass kicked handed to you in a sport like triathlon.
That's a very good point. And also even labeling yourself and being captured by that label. We talk about in the internet world, audience capture. And what that is where you're you identify so much as what your audience perceives you as that you become that, even if it's not what you really want to be. And to a certain degree, anyone in like an online space sees that, but it happened or can recognize that and appreciate that. But in real life, it happens to athletes, it happens to everything where you identify with a certain thing. And the example, you and I talk about, like I've done a number of stupid things like trying to do cactus to clouds, 11,000 vertical gain fasted, right? Like with 40 pounds on my back. Like, can I do it? Well, I made it to 8,000 feet before I needed to eat, right? Broke my body down, took me a week to recover.
Yeah.
And I did it for what? Because people identify me as the guy that can fast and do pretty amazing things fasted and doesn't need food. And it's just like you said, it's like, can I do it? Well, apparently not. I made it to 8,000 feet before I cracked and needed to eat. But sure, I can, but is it optimal?
Yeah.
And I compare that to just yesterday. We talked about, I did, a different peak. I did San Gorgonio, which is not as much elevation gain. It's about 6,000 elevation gain.
That's it. Yeah.
But I fueled. I did the first little part fasted because I feel better, but then I fueled. I had, some fruit, like some fruit smoothies, like little smoothie packs, and I had protein. And I didn't even eat that much, but I broke my own barriers to something where I have psychological kind of dissonance anyway, where I'm like, no, like don't eat, you are who you are, you can do this fasted, what are people gonna think of you? And like nobody gives a crap. And what do you know? Like I felt amazing, I crushed it, and you know what? I not only lived to talk about it, but I was able to crush a workout today, right? Because
Incredible.
I broke my own, and it's not like anything, it's the thing is like I'm not a professional athlete, I'm not anything cool, like I just work out and stay in shape. So for me, that is like a big win for me to be like, because I love my workouts, and I am sad when I don't get to work out because I'm broken down, but I thoroughly enjoy my like days off that feel earned and I feel good, right? But like if I planned to work out today and I couldn't perform because I was so broken down, the negative cascade is so much worse than if I just was like, hey, why don't I fuel a little bit on this hike, and then guess what? I can get my rocks off in my workout today. And I can actually get the bliss and the happiness that I get from a workout, and appreciating that it's okay to like get happiness from your activity, but it's not okay to be like validating upon it. Like that shouldn't validate you. And it was a big lesson for me just even in the last couple weeks, kind of exploring with different fueling strategies. And I typically train fasted in the morning, not because it's the best way to do it, but because like I just generally feel better. But there's a big difference between a 45-minute workout and a 7-hour workout. And to think that like it's okay to just beat yourself up because that's what people expect you to do, or that's what you've told yourself you need to do. So it's so true for just the regular person too. Like, oh, this is the way that I've done things for so long. Like it's also okay to change in things. And if you're not growing, if you're not changing, then you're not growing.
Yeah, well said. And I'll put in a plug here, being in the older age groups, that there's this cumulative effect of doing crazy shit. And stress is cumulative, and we actually do experience aging. And I can, strut around and say, I feel great at 58. Hey, that rhymes. I'm going to say that all year long. But you pay the price down the line. And now I'm healing from my foot surgery and my hamstring procedure and talking about how to train and do this. I'm like, wait, dude, you're a broken down, injured person because you made all these mistakes. And I should put an L on my forehead in certain ways because it's like, how did I get myself into these situations where my body's broken down? Well, one of it was doing fun, crazy shit for 37 years. And now you can't get away with that stuff as you could before. So you asked me, like, do you feel better than you did in younger years? I go, in many ways, yes. But like in the old days, I would come out of the stands at the middle school track meet when the high jump was concluded and take some jumps with no warm up and set a new personal best. Now it takes me 45 minutes to even start with the approaches because I have to do all my flexibility, mobility, injury prevention drills. And possibly it wasn't too smart to do that crazy stuff when I was 42 and 47, even though I could. And so I encourage everyone to look at this longevity goal and throw that into whatever other mix that you're doing. I know I had to sacrifice that when I was trying to break 1 minute off my time in the 2-hour triathlon. And so you're deliberately sacrificing your health to get a little faster in the swim and a little faster in the final mile of the run. And we all knew that and understood that. But for most people, like longevity and endurance and consistency would be great goals so that you're in the game rather than on the sidelines. Because we can, find a lot of people on the sidelines in my age group where they can't even enjoy interacting with their grandkids at soccer practice because they have artificial joints and they didn't foresee the future that they were going to be, they thought they were indestructible maybe.
It's not alpha to keep pushing yourself like that. It's the actual complete opposite.
Yeah, and like now if we rewind the tape and we've heard the word should or shouldn't, we'll back off for a second and say, you know what, anything you want to do is okay. This is your life. This is how you live it. Go feed your ego 27 times at the next workouts where you're comparing to the person on the bike trail. You're going to pass them up and leave them behind. But I learned the hard way that anytime I diverted from my peak performance goals, the penalty was so extreme and so severe. And flying home from Australia for a 14-hour flight with tears in my eyes for part of that time, because I realized that being such a badass for so many months before the World Cup, the most important race in the world, I screwed myself up and I was really tired and overtrained when I got to the starting line because I wanted to perform well so badly. And I was such a badass, such a competitor, and so tough to get up every morning and push my body so hard for hours and hours of training to get on that plane. And then you get on the plane and you're a little stiff and you're a little tight and you arrive in Australia and you feel crappy and you're like, oh, I hope this clears before the biggest race of my life. And then you get on the bike and your legs are gone, but the same legs carried me through these mountains like, the best times I've ever done. And that was a big eye-opener because I knew going in, like, what are you doing, dude? You're overdoing. You're at 33% over your previous capacity. No, I'm okay. I'm feeling great. I'm pushing. And so the fight or flight response can fool us so tremendously to put us on these highs of, chemically induced highs where we're going day after day after day. And now we're going to the hospital for vigil because there's a crisis and we're there for 7 weeks in a row and we're slamming our workout and we're having a little argument with our girlfriend when we get home and we're jumping in the ice bath. And I'm speaking to a population of people that think that, the best way to go through life is the gas pedal on the floor. And sometimes when you get to a certain age, you can sit back and go, oh, okay, yeah, maybe there was a better, more sensible, more enjoyable, more rewarding way to bring it back to fitness goals or even, dietary strategies as you threw that in.
Part of me wonders if, this is a natural progression that you have with age that is, there's only going to be a select few people that are young enough to still be in the thick of it and wise enough to take advice from someone that's older. I feel like most people are going to say, well, you know what? No, that's just the mindset of someone that's been through it, and that's just their retrospective sort of agenda. Yeah. But, I'm feeling good. My testosterone's raging. I'm in my prime. But I think that they really need to take a good hard look at themselves. And I think the biggest takeaway from this is, like, are you doing your workouts to satisfy your ego, or are you doing your workouts for a result? Because your ego is going to tell you something different. And the ego drive is perfectly fine and perfectly acceptable, but your ego also plays tricks on you because your ego is not who you are. Your ego is a little fucker inside your head that tells you you're not good enough. And it's messed with me for decades. And it's the moment that you shut that little sucker up and check it at the door, things go a lot better.
And then, referencing the great champions of the world, like right now, the best middle distance runner in the world is this kid, Jakob Ingebrigtsen from Norway. He's 22 now, and he's destroying the middle distance circuit of the greatest runners in the world, one of the most competitive sports you can imagine. It's beating the Africans, he's beating the Americans, beating everybody, and he just consistently wins every race almost. Olympic gold medal, world champion, and his training is very carefully regulated, so they've got a lot of attention for this double threshold workout style. And then after every interval, he pricks his finger to check his blood lactate to make sure he's not over 4 millimolar because that's the anaerobic threshold. threshold. And if you start to drift into muscle burn too frequently in a workout or too frequently over the course of a week, you're going to trash yourself, especially if you're not an elite athlete. So he's training in a more sensible, less stressful manner than people who are way ass slower than him, who are training to shuffle through a half marathon in 2 hours. No offense to shuffling through a half marathon in 2 hours, but it's like those people are pushing their bodies harder, literally, with blood lactate values and stress hormones and all the objective measures we have of stress than the greatest runner in the world. So he's running always within his capacity. There's a great article in the New York Times. If you have show notes, you can put it in or just search for 87% Jakob Ingebrigtsen in New York Times. He never pushes himself beyond 87% of his capacity in training, ever. In the race, he just ran 3:27, the fastest 1500 in many years. So he was pushing 100.3% of his capacity to set the best time. But in training, everything's so carefully regulated that I believe we're seeing, just in the most recent few years, breakthroughs in the way that athletes are training themselves so that performance continues to increase and break through. Usain Bolt's another great example. Read all his autobiographies and search, Google lazy Usain Bolt. And you'll see all this commentary from Usain Bolt himself in his autobiography and from his coach, Glenn Mills. Usain is very lazy. We have to, always drag him out to the track. He parties in the winter instead of training. He's out at the discos. Now he's like a mixer. He's like a DJ and a record producer. But here's arguably the greatest athlete of all time. I call him and Tiger Woods the two greatest athletes we've ever seen because he dominated the 100 meters, which is the most competitive athletic event on the planet. Every single kid in every country has run a race before. And so we have identified the 8 guys in the lane in the finals are the fastest humans in the world with no entry barriers to this sport. It's like Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback, but there's only 60 quarterbacks in the NFL, so that's great for him, but like Usain Bolt, different level in my opinion. So if he's lazy and he's won 3 Olympics in a row, so the consistency, the longevity, and everything is superior, not only that he's the world record fastest time, but he also did it again and again and again over 12 years. Maybe we should rewind that and look to be how important it is to be lazy or perhaps a very good person at regulating his stress, regulating his energy output, taking time off for his brain to disengage from the circle and the running track and go into the discos and goof around. Maybe that is itself the most evolved athletic training strategy, and we haven't tapped into it yet because we're still watching Rocky IV, where Drago was, getting poked with needles and doing the exact training every day, and Rocky was training with his fighting spirit and motivated by something else. It's profound to think that maybe we need to back off this super technological approach and just go with kind of, intuition and emotional regulation and things that can help us break through more so than paying another coach for more information or watching more videos and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. So on that note, turn off this video. But that's a great way to end it up, man. I mean, so Brad, where can everyone find you, brother?
BradKearns.com, the BRAD podcast. I would start with the Thomas DeLauer interview. That was a sensational experience and, just so wonderful, motivating, inspiring. And I'm just glad to be here hanging with you, my neighbor, for those that don't know. Yeah. And each time I'm going to get a little better at those workouts, but keep it under my capacity. That's why I chose different weights, different size medicine balls than Thomas. I know what I'm doing.
Well, as always, keep it locked in here on the channel and see you tomorrow. Thanks, my man.